Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here at Business Licenses monthly webinar. I'm your webinar moderator. My name is Doug Starr. I'm a partner here with Business Licenses LLC, who is your webinar sponsor. Just for your information, Business Licenses LLC is a business license-specific software advisory and outsourcing firm. We provide timely information through a community-oriented website, software that really speeds your process, license processing, and critical advice through our experienced research attorneys and paralegals. We also have a business license compliance service that includes preparing and remitting licenses, managing the reconciliation process, and responding to and answering business license-related questions. So that's the end of the proselytizing today. Business Licenses LLC does a webinar about once a month, typically on a topic that is of interest to the business licensing community. You'll also notice on your screen that Business Licenses LLC has recently released our enterprise set of services under the brand Business License Solutions. So that's why you're seeing two different logos today. Business License Solutions is aimed at serving the large business market. Many of you are part of that large business market on the phone today. So let me handle some quick administrative details before we get you started with Andrea Jaffe, our COO, who will be discussing an insider view of license management best practices. First of all, make sure you've input your audio pins, so at the end of the presentation, if you wish to interact with us, you can do that. Secondly, right now, all of your phones are muted, so you won't be able to interact with us until the end of the webinar. But generally, we find people find it most comforting to interact with us through the chat or question feature that's in the right toolbar on your screen. So as you ask a question, we will either answer it during the presentation or queue it up for answer at the end of the presentation. We suspect that today is probably somewhere in the range of 25 or 30 minutes of presentation, and then as long as you need for us to answer your questions. So before we get started, we're going to have a little bit of audience participation. We'd like to know a little bit about the general audience. So we've set up a couple of poll questions for you, and the poll questions essentially are designed to give Andrea a little bit of insight into what the audience looks like that she's dealing with. The first poll question should be showing up in your box right now, where it says how many licenses do you currently manage, and you've got three choices. If you could click on one of those for us and give us a sense for the kinds of volumes that we're dealing with, that would be very helpful for us. So see if you can go ahead and answer that poll question, and then we'll follow up with the second one as soon as you've had a chance to answer that. As you're answering the poll, I'll give you a little bit of information about today's speaker and our topic. Andrea Jaffe runs the operations team here at Business Licenses LLC. She's got a rich background in executive management of licensing, tax, data, and operations for a handful of Fortune companies. Her current co-sourcing and outsourcing teams handle thousands of licenses for a variety of customers every month, and have really been fine-tuned over time for efficiency. And through the experience of all that volume, Andrea's really developed workflows and tools which produce optimal efficiency and are designed to give you organized, predictable outcomes. So Andrea's teams work for dozens of clients, each working much like disparate entities that you might have in your business. And these workflows and tools and optimization tips have really helped a variety of internal licensing teams manage their license renewals, activities, and issues more effectively. So on our first poll question, just to give you a sense of the answer, we've got about 70% of our audience that manages more than 200 returns, or licenses. We've got about 14% that manages between 50 and 200, and just under 20% that manages below 50. So now I'm going to bring you to our second poll question, which is how long have you been involved in licensing? And you'll see you've got 4 choices there. You're fairly new at it. You've been at it less than a year. You've been at it for a bit, 1 to 5 years. You've been at it for a long while, which is 5 to 10 years. Or you've been at it for what seems like forever, which is 10 years or more. So if you just take a moment and answer in for this poll, that'll give us a sense for kind of the background and experience level of the audience as well. So today, what you'll hear is a series of a handful of slides where Andrea will walk you through what are those very best tips that she's learned over her years of managing business licenses. And in addition, she's going to focus on 3 key things that seem to be pitfalls for most of the people that we've worked with in helping them to optimize their own internal markets, so our own internal departments. So hopefully you guys will walk away with a good bit of information on what kinds of things you can do to close the gaps in your own process. And at the end, you'll even receive a copy of the business license calendar tool that Andrea uses and recommends. All right, so we have our second poll has come in, and it tells us that about 35% have been at it less than a year, 30% a year to 5 years, 14% for a while, and 22% get that badge of honor. They've been at it forever. So that will help Andrea kind of tailor her comments to the audience. So with no further ado, let me present Andrea Jaffe and our September webcast called Taking Control of Your Business License Process. Andrea, thanks for joining us.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here. As Doug said, today we're going to try to talk about the licensing process and go through some of the steps, some of the pitfalls, and some of the optimization that we use here, and give you guys some insight into how we go through the process day to day over the course of the year, and move on through some talking points, some questions if you have them, and hopefully you guys will come away with some good tips and key issues that you can use in your own practice. So for the agenda overall, we're going to look at the licensing process kind of as a step-by-step, broken down into the actual areas where you might have a pitfall, common process, failure points, things that happen that are out of your control, maybe how to gain some control over those things, or at least how to identify where you might have a shortfall. Talking about the licensing calendar, as Doug mentioned, we're going to be disseminating a calendar to everybody, but you can create a calendar that makes sense for your business with a specific set of data points, and that'll give you guys a good tool to use to manage your workflow. Streamlining the payment process, we can give you some tips on that. This is all, dependent on your interactions with accounts payable, but we do have some helpful tips that sometimes work for our customers, and we're going to share those with you. Jurisdiction follow-up to make sure that your licenses are actually in force, active, and in good standing, and some optimization tips that we use here and that we offer our customers. And then, as time allows, some Q&A or as the need allows. As Doug mentioned, if we see a question come across during the presentation that I can go off onto without really leaving the field too far, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll save some of the questions for the end. If we don't get to everybody's questions, we will be happy to follow up directly with you by email or another follow-up method. So onward and upward. Just covering the typical business licensing process, I know some of the people that signed in are new. And this is kind of step-by-step what has to happen in order to get your license filed or your license renewed. This is primarily talking about renewals workflow that is just talking about renewals for things that have been filed previously and just need to be kept in good standing. So the first event that happens is typically you'll receive a notice from the licensing authority. That is the trigger that says, okay, some action is going to be needed in a relatively short time frame. Next, most of our customers either have some staff or assign themselves a filing task that they know they need to take care of. They gather that renewal notice that they got, and then they will attach the backup documentation. Gathering the data or gathering the documents that are required to accompany a renewal application may mean that you need to go out to different departments, maybe HR for employee count, maybe the tax department to get some gross receipts information. So there's some interaction there with some other departments, and managing that interaction is part of the licensing manager's job. So you need to know who you need to be talking to, who you need to be reaching out to, what kind of lead time they need. Then we go on to adding the fees. There's often calculations that relate to gross receipts or other metrics that you need to identify so that you get the right fees accompanying your application, so that you are not bogged down in a back and forth with the authority about missing fees or penalties, et cetera, and so forth. Then, of course, the generation of a check request, that's your interaction with the accounts payable department. You need to understand the lead time required for that in your own universe to make sure that you have enough time to get all the paperwork you need just to get that check in your hands in time for an on-time filing. You receive the check, record the check number, however you manage your proof of receipt, and then you send the package out to the authority. Even sending the package to the authority may require different modes. There may be different filing methods that you can use. Sometimes, as the authorities come into the 21st century, you've got more and more authorities allowing you to file somewhat online. Sometimes you have to have in-person filing, so scheduling that visit or scheduling that, sending somebody on the ground to the authority, that has to get taken care of as well. Once the filing is taken care of course, there's the turnaround time at the authority side, and that varies. Honestly, our experience, depending on the type of license that's being filed, can be anywhere from instantaneous with an online filing to 6 to 8 weeks for some of the more complicated filings, or some of the filings that have to wait for particular licensing specialists. Some of the highly regulated filings only get processed every quarter. So there's a big variance in how long you need to wait for the certificate, and that depends on the type of license that you're filing. Then, of course, hopefully you receive the certificate. There's no back and forth about fees or any other missing information. You receive the certificate. You scan and save the certificate. Hopefully you have an electronic means of document management that is, best practice at this point. And, the last, breathe a sigh of relief and forget it until next year. That's the typical life cycle of a renewal. So what we talk about is, where can the process lag? And there are a lot of points, as I mentioned, as I ran through the life cycle, where you may have to be interacting with other parties, maybe another department, and of course the authorities. So those are things that aren't always in your control. However, as much control as you can build around it, and as much understanding as you have in advance of what those counterpart departments need from you, the more you can streamline and make the process efficient for your people and your department. Data collection is a key point. As I mentioned, you may have to reach out to HR. For example, many licenses require a number of employees at the location, and you may not have that at your fingertips. It may be something you need to go to HR for, get a report. You may want to do that on a quarterly basis, because employee numbers typically do change as people are hired and terminated. There's not always, a magic number of, there's always 5 people at this location, although that does happen on some of our customers. They always have a certain number at a location. So that's, natural to your business. But again, knowing who you have to interact with, or whom you have to interact with, and how much lead time they need to produce a document or an answer for you, something along the lines of the tax department providing you with gross receipts. They may need, a few weeks to get you that information for the previous quarter or the previous month end, whatever it is. So you need to be aware of what other departments' needs are in terms of lead time, and that way when you schedule that request, you'll know that you've given them enough time to answer and still left enough time for yourself to get the filing underway. Timing issues and volume bottlenecks. That's another one that our customers often mention to us. A lot of renewals happen at the same time, so you've got some bottlenecks where you're talking about a quarter or half year or new year renewal, And sometimes you need to massage your resources so that you have the right number of people available to act within a relatively short amount of time on a lot of paperwork. So that's an area that is a challenge to many of our customers, and smoothing that out, smoothing those peaks and valleys out, or trying to identify how you can get a head start on some of those critical timing points like end of quarter, end of year. That's something that is part of the art of the licensing process. And then, of course, you're at the mercy of the authorities waiting for or not receiving renewal notices. Since a lot of companies use the renewal notice as the trigger, they are often caught, so to speak, with their pants down, pardon the expression, when they, for some reason, did not get the renewal notice, and all of a sudden the renewal is overdue, you're out of compliance, you can risk a shutdown or some other, bad result. So it's always important when you're building the calendar that we're going to talk about, you need to know, and that ultimately your bosses and your company is going to rely on you to have your hand and have a good sense and have your finger on the pulse of when the renewals are due. And they're not going to accept the excuse of waiting for not receiving the renewal notices. So proactivity on your part and knowledge and identifying of when the timing of your renewals is key to running a good management process. Generating payments, as I mentioned before, reaching out to accounts payable, possibly getting purchase orders or check requests, or however your company manages payment requisitions, approved in advance, or at least budgeted in advance. All of those steps that help those tax people and help those money people and help those accounting people do their job. You will be golden with them if you give them the appropriate amount of lead time, the appropriate documentation, the appropriate information that they need to make their life easier and to get you the check you need in a timely fashion. Tracking and receiving current licenses and permits. So you've sent out the package. You're hoping that everything is correct and solid, and you don't hear back from the authority. You don't see any paper coming back across your desk, or you hear from the location or the store that they have not received the license and they've got to display that license, and their license that's currently displayed is expired. So you need to have a means of getting in touch with and identifying and tracking where that piece of paper actually is, what happened, did it get bogged down, has it been lost, et cetera, and so forth, and be proactive about getting the right number of copies or whatever you need to be compliant at your location. And then storing the data and images. This is a challenge that a lot of our customers bring to our attention, where they have piles and piles of paper. They may have to file it or access it later, and it's just sitting in a file drawer or gathering dust on someone's desk, and they don't really know what happened to it once they got it, or maybe they sent it on to a location to be posted and they didn't ever get it, and now you don't have a copy of it. So with all the technology that we have, we recommend, as again I mentioned before, best practices for scanning electronic copies, and see what you can do to have the information and have the images available for your constituents. And we'll go on to the next slide. And as a little upshot of what we've heard from our customers, these are the basic issues that they have. The survey says that their biggest issue is the lack of a fully functional calendar that has all the licensing info in one place. They have issues with payment processes that are not well tuned between licensing and accounts payable. They don't have a good way to get that check in a timely fashion. They don't understand what they need to provide. They think they're giving AP what it needs, and yet there's always questions, or they're not getting approvals on a timely basis. And then jurisdiction lag time for delivering notices at the front end and permits at the back end of the application process. So those are the three things that we are going to try to tackle a little bit in the conversation to try to address what we've heard are the biggest needs. And we'll go on from there. Just to take a quick break, we did get a question in of how does the taxpayer know when a license is needed and how to obtain it. That is the crux of license management. Basically, it depends if you're inheriting a process or if you're involved from the get-go with the initial filings. But typically, what's going to happen is the first alert that you're going to get if you don't have a process in place is that renewal notice. So hopefully you have an idea of what licenses you have in your inventory, and hopefully you know when they expire. Typically the renewal date is 4 to 6 weeks in advance of the expiration. So that's just a rule of thumb in general. And of course, the document itself, the renewal notice, once you have it in hand, will tell you where to file and, you know, all the information as far as method of filing. But the key is that you need to have that piece of paper in advance. What we try to train our customers, and, you know, what we feel is the best approach, is to actually capture this information in a secondary storage resource, be it a spreadsheet or software that manages license renewals, or contact management type software, where you're actually external and apart from any notices that you're receiving as the trigger. You actually have your finger on the pulse of your license inventory, and you know approximately when it's going to be due, who the authority is, contact information about the authority, and that is the art of building that calendar that we're going to touch on. So that was a good, timely question.
Andrea, would you add to that for the audience, in the instance where they've got to get a new license or they've expanded locations, services, products, et cetera, what process do you find your customers going through to determine what they need?
Okay, so typically, depending on the business that we're talking about, sometimes our customers, if they're a brick and mortar location being open, the first thing that they're going to be doing is stopping by the zoning department, and the zoning department will also lead them into the business licensing arena, the city clerk's office. You need to be in touch with the local jurisdiction, the local authority that governs actually the property itself. There will be a lot of paperwork as far as opening a new business, and then the licensing department is often affiliated, or the finance department is often affiliated. In order to do business in a particular jurisdiction, you may need to file, if it's a new state, with the Secretary of State. You may need to file with the county or city locales with regard to taxes, employment, finance, different departments. And all of those should lead you to the business licensing contact. But it's always good to ask, do I need to do anything special about business licensing or licensing the business or getting an operating permit, registering my tax number, things like that. So all of those questions are typically handled with the city clerk or with the county office, and they will usually be very helpful about guiding you step by step. If you're just doing a service in the area, it is always good to identify opening a new market, touching base with, again, the local authority, be it a finance department, a tax department, reaching out to them and asking, being proactive, asking the question, is there anybody that I can speak to? Can you refer me to the business licensing department? You can also often find this information on the county, city, local authority websites. Typically, if you don't see anything specific to business licensing, you can often click into finance or tax, and those are the resources that will either handle it as part of their arena, or they will address you or direct you to the right address within the government bureaucracy that you're dealing with. So when you're talking about a new location, that's a whole different issue, but your resources are similar. You'll still be dealing with somebody in the same building, typically, as tax, finance, licensing authority. So that is your best bet in terms of getting information quickly and dealing with the right people as soon as you know you want to open a business in a particular location.
And I might add to that, Andrea, that some of the tools that we use when we're helping clients with that question is, a database of research materials, whether it be, contact information for the different jurisdictions, or, combing through different codes that apply to those different licensing authorities to really determine which licenses, permits, registrations, et cetera, you need. And sometimes that becomes vexing or difficult to figure out, and you may need to employ a resource like an experienced researcher or an attorney to do that. Certainly those are services that we offer to a lot of our large clients, but most people will turn to a resource like our research department or an attorney. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. Now we'll just move on to talking about the calendar itself. Now, a lot of people are very savvy as far as Excel goes. The calendar that we're going to distribute is an Excel spreadsheet, and Excel does a lot of work for you if you have it populated properly and you're comfortable with filtering and things like that. So what we're recommending is using that strength of Excel in this case and creating a calendar for yourself, or you can use the template that we'll be sending out to you, and capturing critical information that becomes a living document or a living repository for your license workflow or your license inventory. The first and foremost dedicated data items are going to be the license ID, the name of the license, what type of license it is, the number that is assigned to that license, and or the account. Sometimes you'll have an account and a license number that are different. It's important for you to know both. Both are referenceable data elements. And that is the driver. That's typically the ID key that you will run your management off of, the name of the license or the license number. The expiration date of the license is obviously a key data element. You need to know timing-wise when that license is becoming due. The renewal or due date of the license. So as I mentioned before, obviously you don't want to wait until the last minute to let that license expire. Renewals typically occur 4 to 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. So it's important for you to plan accordingly, especially around year-end, holiday times. You have to know that the authorities are going to be busy. You want to get your license application in timely. Frequency of renewals. Not every license is renewable annually. Not every license is renewable a year after you apply for it. Sometimes you can apply in the middle of what is a fiscal year or a licensing year for the authority, so you can actually apply for a license, as we talked about on the initial basis in November, not realizing that all the licenses in that jurisdiction actually renew in March. So you'll be doing this renewal really quickly. It's not like you have a year automatically. So very important for you to know the frequency of the renewal and that renewal date. Some licenses are only renewed every 2 years. So again, as far as accruing for costs, licensing fees, that's something that accounting would like to know. How often are you going to be paying that fee? So those are data elements that are critical for the process. Filing status, this is how you track the progress of your workflow. Is it in process? Has it been submitted? Have we received a license, et cetera? Is it waiting on information from a particular department? Is it waiting on a check? You can add in as many status types as makes sense for your environment. Licensing authority and contact data. I probably should have moved this further up the list. It's very important to know who you're talking to. So when you're talking about the license ID, the licensing authority or the jurisdiction is probably going to be very helpful for you to know what city and state you're in, et cetera, and so forth. And then the licensing authority itself. Is it the Department of Finance? Is it the tax department? Is it a business licensing department? Who am I dealing with? Sometimes you'll be dealing with something as obscure as a police department, for example, for certain types of filings. So you really have to know who the authority is and what the jurisdiction is. And then what's often helpful is to build in spaceholders for contact information so that you can follow up proactively with those contacts at the authority, be it an email address, a phone number, a name. You'll often have a lot of information available on the Internet. Sometimes you'll have information actually listed on the renewal notice. Sometimes it's a matter of making that first phone call or that first email contact and building a relationship with the person at the other end. We have been very successful in building a contact database for many, many, many jurisdictions, close to 50,000 jurisdictions, and actually have somebody to talk to at each one of them that can help us and guide us when we're working on behalf of one of our customers. So I strongly recommend either you or your staff really taking the time to identify with whom they have spoken, were they helpful, make them a resource. Turn the people that work for the government into somebody that works for you as well. It is all taxpayer money, so you might as well get your money's worth. And then something else that's often helpful is the method of filing indicator. Is this an online filing? Is this a walk-in? Walk-ins are particularly touchy. You need to have somebody on the ground at the right time who can stand online, get the paperwork together, hand it in properly, and hope that you've accomplished everything and included everything you need in the package. Otherwise, that guy's going back or that gal's going back and having to stand online yet again. So the method of filing indicator is key. You always want to know if it's mail only, if there's a FedEx box. We typically find that FedEx is the most reliable, but not everybody will take FedEx if you're dealing with a PO box, et cetera. So you really have to be on top of what the appropriate method of filing is. And then there's a deadline alert indicator, and this is something that you can set up on your own. If you want to use Excel to do this for you, if you have a renewal date, you can actually program a cell to give you an alert or to pop up 30 days before or 60 days before, so that you can plan at the beginning of the month what you're going to have to tackle in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So that's something that makes your workflow a little bit more useful. Okay, and then this slide, not to spend too much time on, this is actually a license example of a license calendar that we use in-house, but since you're going to be getting one, we'll just kind of quickly gloss over it. As you see, there's the license number, the name, the jurisdiction, if it's a state, county, et cetera, when the expiration date is, the due date, et cetera. So you'll see that more hands-on when you get the handout. Now we'll run over to simplifying the payment process. So we want to schedule the check request based on the calendar. You know what's due in the next few weeks, and you want to get your paperwork in order. If you already have the notice in hand and you know the amount, you can just send it up to whoever needs to approve it. That's great. Hopefully you'll have enough lead time to get the check back. You want to prepare documentation in advance. If you know that you're going to need gross receipts each month, you can have a standing request for gross receipts from your tax department, and then just await the notices to confirm that that's what the licensing authority is still looking for. Sometimes they do change their fee base. That's rare. So it's always good to have the information on hand in advance. If you know you always need a number of employees, you can get that set up with HR in advance, or you can do both. Then what you want to do is provide a budget or estimate for approval. And again, this is over time. You build this information up as you go through the licensing and as you build your portfolio, that you know your approximate costs each month and how much you're estimating, so that you can get that in the budget and then do a reconciliation when you actually get the notices and make sure that you're on target, or if the fees have changed drastically. Typically they go up, they hardly ever go down, but this is important information for the accounting folks and for your direct overseeing departments to make sure that they've got monies appropriately allocated. And then, of course, in order to make friends and to also get your job done, you want to supply comprehensive details to accounts payable so that your first request is your only request. That will include the fee, any penalty and interest information that's included in your notice for whatever reason, if there's something that was deficient on the last application, the license location so they know exactly which place they are issuing the check for. That's often important when you have multiple locations. If you know the general ledger account reference number, that's always welcome. And, of course, the due date so that accounts payable knows how soon they need to issue you that check. And now once you've gotten that package out the door, there are some follow-up tips that we can give you with our experience calling the jurisdictions. Know what information you will need to access your records. A lot of times the jurisdictions will only speak to the officer on the application. That makes it a little bit difficult, but sometimes you can get around that. Many times the licensing authority will just ask for the EIN number, the names of the officers. They know that they're not necessarily going to always be speaking to the president of the company. License and account number is a key data element that we spoke about before. That's how they reference it in their system, so they'll pull it up right away. Location information, if they go by address, it's important for you to know the address of the license location. It's good to have a copy of the current and previous filings on hand so you can reference any issues or questions that you may have or they may have. Proof of mailing, you should definitely always use some certified or other trackable method so that you can say, well, I know it was delivered on this and this date, and somebody named, if it's legible, whoever the name is, signed for it. And of course, cancel checks. If you have canceled checks, at least you know they have your money, so that they should be inclined to go ahead and process the application.
Andrea, we just got a question, and it looks as if someone has had difficulty with jurisdiction response. The question is, are the jurisdictions really responsive to you when you call to follow up on a license application?
Right. Okay. So that is a challenge. A lot of times, again, our experience may be a little bit different than yours, but we all have to work around the same issues. When we call the licensing authorities, it depends on who we get to speak to and what their rules are. Some of them will be very, very reticent about releasing information to like I said, not the officer or not the signatory on the application. But in most cases, they are pretty helpful when you have the right information, when you sound like you know what you're talking about, and when you kind of make them go to work for you, saying, this was sent in on this and this date, we have confirmation, can you just confirm that everything's in good standing? You can get kind of an agreement from them or a verification from them without necessarily making them compromise information that they don't want to release. But yes, it can be a challenge. It has been a challenge, especially if you're a third party or if you're not exactly related directly to the filing name or the name of the applicant. But again, with as long as you have as much information as you can, and you can show them that you have a legitimate reason for following up or asking this question, over time they will be pretty accommodating, and they do try to help, and they do try to give you the information that you're looking for. So it's kind of building a rapport, and then just some of it's luck, but some of it's building a rapport and sounding like you know what you're talking about and you know what you need, and they want to make you happy. So there's an art to it. It's something that happens, with experience, but it's definitely doable. Other process optimization tips: good document management tools. This is a key issue. I mentioned before a couple times scanning. It's very important that you have electronic copies of any documents with, paper trails and e-paper trails. That is your best bet for understanding and knowing what you have on hand, and does not leave you at the mercy of the mail, does not leave you at the mercy of somebody in the store that you sent or the location, the office that you sent the license to, filing it incorrectly or not hanging it up, etc. Always keep copies. Scanning is key. Data storage is key. So those are things that we highly recommend. If you don't have, you should implement as soon as you can. Track your progress. Create a checklist. Use the spreadsheet that we have so that you know exactly what's happening with each of your licenses, where it is in the process. Keep names and numbers of contacts you've dealt with previously. That's what I mentioned before. It's always good to have friends in high places or even low places when they need to help you out. So that's very, very good, valuable intellectual property. And if using spreadsheets, standardize the cell values to enable filtering and sorting. Don't put a lot of comments in there. Try to keep it natural so that you can actually filter. So those are our basic process optimization tips, and of course you can implement these and enable yourself to run a smoother operation overall. We can help, of course, if you have any questions on how to do anything in particular. But these are things that you might not have thought of off the top, and now that you think of them, they seem to be no-brainers almost. But in any event, these are things that can really allow your department to function very, very smoothly. Now I just want to go over the takeaways from today's discussion. So hopefully everybody feels like they got valuable information. And as I mentioned, we're going to get a calendar out to you so that you can get a calendar in place if you don't already have one. We think that's your best bet for managing the workflow, and that's the key data collection tool that you're going to use. Understand and follow an intelligent workflow. That means that you know exactly where in the process you are, where you stand, what your hurdles might be, where your time might get delayed, so you build in enough time in the planning process. And engineer solutions for your common pitfalls and disconnects. So if you need to make friends and buy chocolate for somebody in accounts payable, you need to go out and get that chocolate because you want those checks coming in on time. If it means hooking up with HR or the tax department if you're not that closely aligned or if they're in another location, make sure you make that connection. and get everyone involved in understanding why they need the information and what it means, what the risks are for not having it. When everybody understands what the risks are for not having licenses in good standing, they're much more likely to be on board and try to accommodate. As long as you're helping out with what they need, they'll help out with what you need. And then we still have a couple minutes if you have any other questions. I think we got a couple more in.
We did. So right now, Andrea has finished with the body of her presentation and thoughts. So if you have a question that you'd like Andrea to answer, you've got a seasoned licensing pro from every aspect of licensing on the hook here to answer those questions. The best bet is for you to type a question in the question box, as we've got a number of questions right now that we'll walk through, and we'll get Andrea to answer that. If for some reason the question is not applicable to the entire audience, or we've got to do some research to answer it, we will circle back with you. But we do have a handful of questions here that look like they're right up your alley, Andrea.
Okay.
The first one here is kind of generic. I've heard this a lot in talking to customers. Can you pull a blank renewal application off the licensing authority's website and submit that rather than waiting for your voucher?
Okay, that is a good question. And again, the answer is it depends, unfortunately or fortunately. We have found that there are a lot of jurisdictions that issue a specific piece of paper on a specific color paper with specific pre-populated data, so that pulling a blank renewal application off the internet is not going to work, and there probably isn't one to pull. However, a lot of the regulated types of businesses do sometimes have renewal applications online because the information is different each time you have to submit that renewal. So sometimes it's not to the benefit of the authority to actually pre-populate or whatever. By and large, though, you're going to need the actual renewal notice with the invoice. Typically, it comes with a fee pre-billed, with room for modification if your numbers have changed, with room for other information changes like address, corporate office changes, officer changes. So they really want that specific notice that they've sent. They've got their system built around that. They like to have their pre-populated information confirmed, and they like to get their pink or green paper in the pile so they know what they're dealing with. So by and large, the answer is, especially for non-regulated businesses, the answer is that you need the actual renewal notice. There are some percentage of renewal notices you can get online.
Okay. We've got a few more that have come in. One of the questions that came in earlier was, can you recommend a process for storing licenses and information electronically?
Okay, so we talked a little bit about scanning. Of course, there are commercially available software solutions. Obviously, we have one. There are other companies that offer that type of thing. But you can typically manage your documents. Most companies have some type of document management tools already. A lot of the larger companies, copiers, have scanners built in. You can scan to a local repository. You can scan to the cloud. We definitely recommend, as I said, best practice dictates that you do keep electronic copies. And it can be something as simple as a program called ScanSnap, where you have a little scanner on your desk and you just store it locally, or you can go out and have your company network build a file repository for you, or even go out to the cloud. And there are some companies that offer document management or document holding off, not on your server, but off-site. And that's basically what they do. They just store your documents that you scan. So there are a couple different options out there, and depending on your need, you can explore any of those.
And Andrea, just as a follow-up to that question, what's your feeling about using electronic methodology versus file cabinets and desk drawers?
Well, there's a lot of risk involved with hard copies these days. One of the businesses that I used to run was actually completely destroyed by a flood. The entire paperwork for a business was lost, and it took about 2 years to recover overall. But there's fire, there's flood, there's just misplacing. There's a lot of risk involved with hard copy. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't need that hard copy. A lot of those hard copies actually have to be displayed at a location, so you can't do away with it completely. But as far as having backup with all the technology involved in this day and age, there's no excuse not to have some type of electronic backup.
Okay, thanks. So I think Andrea would recommend that everybody try to figure out a way to get to the point where they're really handling their licenses in the electronic age and not risk losing them by having them laying on the corner of a desk somewhere or in a file cabinet collecting dust. All right, we've got a couple of more here. One of the questions was, how many licenses have you found a rep is able to process each year? I don't know if answering each year is the right increment, but can you address that question?
Yeah, well, again, that will depend on the complexity of the licenses involved. If you're dealing with a non-regulated license, typical business licenses, retail, stuff like that, your volume could be somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 licenses a year that a single person can handle. Once you get beyond the 1,500 mark, you're probably talking about adding an administrative assistant. It does tend to get cumbersome over time. So when you're talking about regulated, however, all bets are off because some of those renewals, I know in the mortgage industry, some other pharmaceutical industries, some of the packages for the renewals can take weeks to compile, and it takes coordination with a lot of different departments. So we would say that it varies, but 1,000 licenses for a generic, regular, plain vanilla type business is certainly doable. Somewhere creeping up to 1,500 or a little bit above. You should have a resource. A resource should be able to handle it if they're organized and well-versed. Okay,
and I'm guessing, Andrea, as you say that based on what I've heard from clients in the past, that means that they're using some sort of very novel workflow software.
Well, either software or some management tool. I mean, you can't just manage paper independently. So, sorry about that. You got somebody's cell phone on. So yes, it would entail using some type of management tool, but once you optimize your process, that should be a reasonable volume. Okay, I do see another question that came in, which I'll answer. Are national licenses available for the same activity versus obtaining locally? Typically not very many. Certainly not in the U.S. What we're dealing with, you may not realize, is 70,000 different licensing jurisdictions, and this is where they get their money. This is a lot of the revenue for those jurisdictions. So they have no incentive to go national. They have no incentive to go standard. They really just want to collect their money. And there isn't really a national movement to standardize. There are a lot of types of national levels of certification and licensing in general for different types of practitioners like CPAs and things like that. But what we're talking about does not lend itself to that realm. So that is pretty much not in the cards.
Okay. Another question that we got is, after my little diatribe there, was, so what volume of licenses is needed to justify purchasing some sort of licensing software?
So we would say that, if you're managing under 200 licenses, we can make a good case for outsourcing, but probably not software investment. Anything from 200 to 500, you're probably looking at some type of software management tool that you can implement in your office. Once you get to that level, 200 to 500, you're talking about, substantial amount of paperwork, substantial amount of correspondence, and that probably is the tipping point.
Okay. We had kind of an add-on to the question about storing electronically. One of the listeners asked, do you recommend having only the actual license stored electronically or all the documentation related to the renewals?
If you have the space, it does not hurt to have the backup for the renewals. And the reason I say that is if you have changeover in your staff, it's always helpful for somebody to look at the previous renewal so that they can look at what was attached previously, and it'll give them a head start on getting this year's done properly. If you just have the paper itself and no backup, they're going to be starting from scratch potentially, and that's something that you can easily avoid.
Okay. We do have, well, another question came in, but we have one last question on this notion of doing research. Essentially, they've asked if there's free resources for researching licensing for new ventures. And that's a little bit of a loaded question because you can answer that 2 or 3 ways. But take a swing at it if you would.
Well, there's no limit to the information on the Internet. You need to know where to go, and you need to know that what you're looking at is valuable and accurate. So Wikipedia is out, but there are quite a few websites that cover municipal codes that are free. And of course, there are plenty of people that will offer to do that for you for a small fee. But yeah, the answer is, in general, there's a website called municode.com, and there are some other websites that are just managed by the authority itself. There's no real central location for researching overall in multiple jurisdictions. You really have to know what jurisdiction you're looking for and then look for the resources available.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. There are a couple of other questions. You know, one of the things that I would add to your comment there is that we have a database of licenses, applications, authority contacts. That's a relatively inexpensive tool for people to use as kind of preliminary research, or at least a reference tool for the kinds of licensing that they're going to do. And we'd be glad to talk to anybody about that along the way. We have a question about RDS, and we'll answer that offline and get you a little better answer. The question is the revenue discovery systems and tips on dealing with them, and we may have some tips for you that we could pass along via email, so we didn't miss your question. We also have a question about pricing for a software management tool and whether or not that's something that could be hosted on the server. Our particular tool is a web-based cloud service offering, and it's priced to a large degree based on the amount of traffic that you push over the tool. So I'll circle back with the person that asked the question on that and give them a pricing list on that as well. We have another question about, really not a question, but almost a suggestion for storage. One person in the audience says, I scan, save all business license copies separately on a shared drive. A second scan on a shared drive is with backup. It works well for all involved. The license is easy to retrieve if needed. So that's a good low-cost recommendation for at least getting yourself electronically involved in collecting your records. So we're running short of time here, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. If we've missed a question, I will be glad to make sure that we follow up with it. We've got a list of all the questions that are here, and we appreciate you folks for all participating in such a way that it got answers to people who probably have the same questions they weren't able to ask. So you are going to receive a survey at some point after the conclusion of this webinar, and we'd really like to encourage you to fill it out. It helps us to keep the content relevant to the audience and understand, you know, whether we've gone too quickly, too slowly, or we've been too boring or just wildly exciting. So please fill that out and let us know, and we'll keep doing the webinars on topics that you guys have recommended. We will also have a copy of Andrea's licensing calendar worksheet for each of you as our token of appreciation for joining us today. So we've got your emails, and we'll email that out to you. If you've got questions on that, you can feel free to communicate with either Andrea or myself. Both of our emails and phone numbers are on the screen. And we do hope that you'll be able to join us for the next webinar. We will shoot out invitations to that as soon as we have determined the timing for it. But we're going to be featuring a guest speaker with some tips and tools for efficiently researching your business license needs, which seems to be one of the larger questions in the audience today. So it looks like we're spot on with what you guys are trying to figure out. So thanks again, and be sure to visit us at businesslicensesolutions.com or businesslicenses.com for any more information and just to get a look at our end-to-end services and how we might be helpful with any questions or difficulties that you've encountered in your business licensing process. So I hope all of you have a great afternoon, and thanks again for joining us. Take care.